Puja Abbassi, you are Vice President of Product at Giant Swarm.
Yes.
Great. We were just talking about some interesting subject matter. You came out with news today about a joint announcement to keep the Flux project healthy. Right. Previously, Flux had been really run by Weaveworks, mainly, and Weaveworks then went out of business. And now, who in the community is going to support Flux?
The good thing is it was under production use in a lot of places. Like Microsoft has it built into Azure, GitLab has it built in. So a lot of these companies said, yeah, we step up, we're going to continue our enterprise support, but we're also going to contribute to the core open source. So I think GitLab and Microsoft as existing contributors and maintainers, but also Control Plane, they took over some of the maintainers that used to work at Weaveworks, like Stefan, the main contributor and maintainer of the Flux project. And they also confirmed, yes, we'll commit to keeping the core Flux open source project healthy. And we also basically stepped up and said, we are going to contribute our production experience, our end users experience, all using GitOps with Flux, bring it to the project, look at what other projects, and I think this is also important, not just the Flux core, but also what are the other auxiliary projects to Flux that need to stay healthy, like the infrastructure as code plugins or the UIs. A lot of people are asking for what's up with interfaces, a web UI for Flux, because Argo has it. Flux was always missing a bit on that area.
So Flux is essentially a GitOps technology platform.
Yes.
And it's different than Argo in terms of it provides almost like a framework.
Yeah, the good thing, and this is why we chose Flux, was it's very cloud native. It was really built for this Kubernetes use case. It is using native Kubernetes objects. It's basically just extending Kubernetes with CRDs. So you can reuse all the API functionality on the permissions of Kubernetes itself. And it is fully API driven, so it's easy to integrate it into other products. That's what GitLab and Microsoft did. So it can run behind the scenes, but it can also directly work for end users.
Behind the scenes and directly for end users. And the extensions that they do, the plugins, then fit into Flux, such as what you were describing. How do you measure the importance of this ecosystem in this community? How do you value that?
That's always the thing with choosing an open source project to use within your stack, no matter if it's for you as an end user in an enterprise or if it's a vendor that chooses to integrate another solution into their bigger offering, like Microsoft or Red Hat or us. You always try to avoid risk on the one side. It's how risky is this project? Is it too single vendor driven? Is it even in the CNCF? Is there a foundation that might take it over at some point? Is there enough diversity, enough end usership there so that use cases get bundled? And on the other side, you try to see with these APIs and the nativity to Kubernetes and the cloud native ecosystem, how well does it interface and integrate with other tools? Because in the end, you always want to integrate with different tools, and if the interfaces are not clear, you're going to have a problem doing that.
So tell us about Giant Swarm and how you use Flux.
So Giant Swarm decided at some point, okay, GitOps is a good idea, let's say. It makes the declarative way of what Kubernetes basically brought into the cloud native ecosystem, declaratively managing everything that is managed by Kubernetes. It makes it even more declarative in a way, in form of you will have the source of truth that lives in Git and that is versioned. And we just said, okay, it needs to become a real interface next to an API, a CLI, maybe a UI. GitOps is the fourth interface. And we decided that Flux is good implementation of such an interface, and then started testing it with different end users, different enterprises to see where's the problems. Because always it's just one part of the puzzle. Where do people have problems in adoption? Where do we still have to solve problems? And actually one of our colleagues gave a talk yesterday about repository layouts and best practices to do actually with any GitOps tool to get a better separation of concerns and how to manage certain hurdles that you run into when you're using GitOps.
And so you began adopting it when?
It's been a few years back, 3 years. It was very early. It was still the V1 version of Flux.
What was your impetus for it? You needed to have a better approach to managing, these rollouts, for instance. You need better rollback control. What were some of the factors there?
One of the big factors was, and this was always important for us because we always run fleets and our customers run fleets of clusters. It's not just 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
It's maybe 60, 70, 80
Yeah.
clusters. So it needs to support this multitude of environments, and on top of these, so you need layers and on layers. And this was one thing that we said, okay, GitOps can help you with managing these layers and making the layers transparent and exposing some of the layers to, from our side to our customers, and then also from the platform teams on our customer side to their end users, to the developer teams or to other business units. Be able to give some freedom or at least give some transparency into what is the underlying technology that is running the end user container.
And so when Weaveworks stopped, had to, shut down, unfortunately, what happened?
So honestly, I was not afraid. I thought with Flux, we were very secure in that the community around Flux was strong enough, and I was anticipating basically what came out in the press release today, that enough people, enough companies will say, yes, we'll support it, we'll continue support, and even try to take over whoever was working on it to continue with the same people on the same project, because it made sense as a project. And luckily, once it was clear that Weaveworks can't continue like it was, we started conversations in the backgrounds first, just talking about it privately. Then there was GitHub issues where people started mentioning, yeah, we support it too, and we supported a lot of people that we didn't know, that maybe also Alexis didn't know, started saying, hey, we're in. We also use it in production. We're happy to help.
Wow.
And this was amazing to see.
So what is your help that you're providing?
So there's two sides to the help that GiantStorm provides for any upstream project. We use a lot of open source projects in the ecosystem. And there's two sides that we provide. On the one side, we represent a big part of the end user community. A lot of our end users are all very big, and we try to represent them towards an open source project in that we test things with these big enterprises and give feedback on scalability, performance, things that sometimes can't be tested. We did that a lot for Ingress Nginx, for example, because things were breaking in a certain customer environment that was impossible to put into a real test. So we were working with maintainers upstream to see, okay, does this fix the problem? And we were testing in the background basically alpha versions of these things. In some cases, we are able to provide also the code that fixes the problem that we are seeing. In some cases, we're too far or we're not really sure what to do. Then we work with the upstream project. But oftentimes it's also maybe there needs to be a feature that is only relevant for a subset of end users. We see that feature and we'll try to provide it upstream, talk to upstream and see, is this something that makes sense for the wider audience, or do we need to just have it as a plugin, let's say.
So what's the short-term plan and the long-term plan for your involvement and the community's involvement in maintaining Flux?
So for Flux, mainly the core seems to be taken care of pretty much very well.
Yeah.
We'll still, if we can support anything, if we need to contribute there, especially in terms of like scalability use cases, we will do that definitely. One thing where we see there has not been enough support in the community is UIs and interfaces, or also the integration into things like Backstage.
Okay.
And that's where we've put in quite some engineering power already, and would like to collaborate with more of the other open source community members to see, can we work on something together, because we don't want to own that. We don't want to work on our UI and have a Giant Swarm specific one. We would like to have an open source one for all of Flux that everyone can use, and collaborate on that with other companies. But
So that's more of a long-term effort to continue the maintenance, not just of the core, but of the infrastructure and the plugins for.
And the
Okay.
importance,
Yeah.
I would say, like, it's very important. Like, the UI seems to be very important. Like, because a lot of people that we see adopting GitOps go for example, Argo, because they see a very well-developed and very useful UI experience. And the end users, especially developers, oftentimes do like that. And if Flux is missing that really nice UI experience, there is a risk of it becoming just the second fiddle. So we're keeping the auxiliary projects healthy, will also keep the core healthy.
Do you see this affecting your business in the long term? Are you going to have to, will you stay committed to Flux? I mean, right now, I guess you will, but what will be the factors to maintain your own long-term support of the project?
For us, it's mainly about, as long as it's useful for the end user, as long as it's useful for our customers, and as long as it's the best choice in the market, we will stay with Flux. If at some point a better choice comes out, we need to see. But we are interested in not changing that much, because any change will be work. So we will try to stay committed to keeping Flux the best choice in the GitOps market for us, for the use cases that we are seeing, so we can also stay without having to switch and transition, which is, especially on the end user side, always a huge hassle. Any transition between any technology solution, even if it's behind any, like hidden behind it, is always a lot of work for everyone.
So do you use other projects that are similarly maintained to them compared to Flux?
I would say most of the projects that we're using, we try to choose something that is similarly maintained to Flux. Even auxiliary projects to Kubernetes, like Cluster API, might not be the only way to spin up clusters, but it's a multi-provider, multi-vendor project where a lot of people came together. Like Red Hat is in there, VMware is in there, Microsoft is in there, AWS is in there, we are in there, and everyone is working together. Even end users like Mercedes-Benz are in there to work together to get towards a standard solution for declaratively spinning up clusters. And that's what we always believe in and try to push.
So is this putting a deeper emphasis for you on monitoring the health of these companies that are supporting 72?
Honestly, yes. Honestly, yes, because also our customers will be asking for it more. We were already monitoring to some extent, but we're looking into formalizing it a bit more. I was talking to Stephen Augustus from Cisco, who is also doing the OpenSSF work, and they have, for example, the OpenSSF scorecard. And such scorecards and such like health checks maybe would be something where we can formalize better, even as a community. Is this something that like an enterprise should be already adopting? Is it ready? Is it low risk? How much risk is it?
Because then you have to look at the company without.
It is a bit also about the main company behind it. Are they VC financed? Are they self-financed? Are they small, big?
In Weaveworks' case, they couldn't get another round of funding, so they had to protect their business.
Yeah.
There's other companies out there that are VC funded. There's no guarantee that funding will continue.
Never is. I mean, we've been in this ecosystem for as long as it is there, and we've seen there has been so many mergers, acquisitions, and shutdowns, like Core has getting low. Sometimes you see projects surviving these things, sometimes they don't, and it's always a battle kind of, or it's always a bit of risk, but especially as vendors, I think it's on us to take that risk and say, we swallow it and we bet on something, we try to keep that healthy as possible, like we're now doing with Flux. If not, we need to put in the work so the end user doesn't need to anymore.
What are the lessons learned that you're taking away? We've had HashiCorp, right, go to a different model, close, they basically changed their open source license. We've seen now Linkerd make changes into charging for their project. We've seen now Flux, and there'll be more. What are the lessons learned over the past several months for you?
I've tried to even give talks about that, actually. I've been thinking about this, talking to end users. I talk a lot in my CNCF ambassador role to end user companies, trying to see exactly what are the lessons learned, what can we do better next time choosing solutions. And one thing that is, there's always just science, right? One thing is the project in the CNCF that helps a bit. If it's in a foundation, it can not easily be pulled out of the foundation. There's still the Linkerd case now that is borderline. There's maybe some would say it's a hole in the system, but generally there's still some guidelines that help keep the project sustainable. And in the case of Flux, the CNCF helped gather and find people that are keeping the projects healthy. They do that in other projects too, like etcd or Dex, where Kubernetes actually depends on it, trying to find maintainers, maybe even financing maintainers there. But that's not the only thing. It's like how single vendored is a solution is always the case. Is it really just one company, or are there more companies behind the project, or at least more companies getting slightly involved, maybe not on maintainership level, but on a decent contributorship level? And also, how does the project handle this governance? Are they trying to be more open and transparent in their governance? Do they listen to the end users, or are they still keeping governance non-open source in the main vendor and only opening the minor questions to the audience?
Which we saw with HashiCorp. Right?
Exactly, right.
They open plugins to external vendors, but they maintain the whole core themselves.
Exactly.
And that's been their approach.
And in that case, one of the learnings I think with HashiCorp was basically a very positive thing, is if the community, the end user community, is big enough and important enough, at some point or a vendor that wants to basically profit from this move will step up and create a competition. We have OpenTofu and OpenBow now. Yeah. And that wouldn't have happened if there wouldn't have been a big community of end users that are depending on this project and are now looking for an alternative.
Right.
So if the project is used by enough people, if it's a de facto standard in the case, let's say Cilium, there's low risk. Even if the vendor goes away, there will be someone stepping up, and the CNCF, if it's in a CNCF, will even help with that. And that's something we learned from HashiCorp, I would say.
So the CNCF has to be deeply involved too, because these are projects often that are graduate.
Yes. I mean, we can't put all the pressure on them.
Right.
Because they're only just one stakeholder, and they have also other things to do. Let's say they can't just keep projects healthy, and there's 180 something projects by now. It's impossible to take care of all of these. But at least they do and try to help where possible. And in the cases of OpenTofu and OpenBow, they did quite a lot of things too. I think they didn't move into CNCF, but at least they went into Linux Foundation, which is the extension of that.
So what else is happening for y'all at KubeCon this year? KubeCon is now, we're here in Paris. What are you announcing? Are you have any other news that you're talking about?
So the one thing that we are announcing is basically the third generation of our platform. It might not be a pinpoint generation. You can't do that with an evolving product like ours. But I think what means 3.0 to us is that we are even more betting on open standards. Like our old generation, or the vintage generation, how we call it, used to have our own implementation of cluster lifecycles in there. The new one has the upstream cluster API. And that's our big move to say, okay, we don't want to maintain our own anymore. Everything that we do, even custom things, we contribute back to the open source community. And Cluster API, I think, is a great example of how a lot of even competing vendors can collaborate on the base that doesn't differentiate us. And the other side of 3.0 is, there's three pillars to 3.0. One is the Cluster API cluster management side. The other one is basically the Flux-related GitOps first approach. GitOps being basically the first class interface citizen. And even our UIs, we might have a backstage developer portal, but the business logic doesn't move into a UI. It is kept in the API and works through the GitOps interface. So nobody will be able to change something in the UI that isn't reflected in GitOps too. So that integration is very essential for us. So all the interfaces are treated equally. And the third pillar is having an integration of different platform capabilities. A lot of platform teams and products, they try to separate Kubernetes, and then there's observability, there's security, there's maybe connectivity with service meshes, and then some developer productivity, GitOps, pipeline, automation, but they all don't integrate. The real power of cloud native is when these often separate teams even, when they talk to each other and integrate, when I can get my security data into my monitoring stack, when I can get the service mesh out of the box monitoring also into the monitoring, when I hook this back into my pipeline and can do canary deployments, flag deployments, automatic rollouts, and if that all is also secured by secure supply chain, then you have an integrated experience. And it's possible with all these open source tools out there, but building the glue and actually gluing them together is not trivial. And bringing this to platform teams there, so they can build the last mile towards the developers, that's the power of what we announced with Platform 3.0.
So what do you see going forward for open source projects and your efforts that are deeply dependent on these open source projects? You talked about those three pillars, the cluster API focus, the GitOps focus, and the first was?
The integration of platform capabilities.
And which has a lot of, deep dependencies on cloud native technology. Yes. So I think one thing that's interesting to me is how important those combined viewpoints really kind of speak to the holistic mission of the cloud native computing foundation and the cloud native technology.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Seeing the whole and not just the landscape of next 100 projects, seeing it as the enabler of the next use cases. And those use cases are now also popping up at KubeCon, right? We have WASM kind of very close. Right. We have the AI use cases. There's an AI Colo right now. And all these, they share a common base of cloud native technologies. Right. And in the end, that's the base platform, and we'll have a platform of platforms on top of cloud native projects. Platforms for traditional containers, maybe for virtual machines, for serverless, for WASM, for AI. Especially for data science, the platform looks completely different. When I'm a web developer, I might be, or normal developers want to develop in containers. And a data scientist, they need a Jupyter notebook like Kubeflow and other things, and they also need different kinds of requirements that GPUs can fulfill that other special hardware only can fulfill. So we'll see specialized platforms popping up, but they can all be based on the common base platform that we provide as a CCF.
Yeah, for me, it's like a constant view of almost of a constellation where you can barely see the points of light at some point, but then they become more clear, more clear, more clear the closer you get to finding the ways to get to them. And so that seems to be, what we see, for instance, with WebAssembly.
Yeah.
To me, I'm not sure how you see that with AI right now. The only way I see it right now is like we went through hardware generation, went through a software generation. Now we're kind of finding ourselves in a new hardware generation, which will lead to new software innovation. And AI, I think, is like one of those things like security. It's always been there. It may have been called automation in some years and other things in other years, but now it's just called AI because the technologies have automated and the infrastructure has become advanced.
I think there's two sides. One side is exactly what you mentioned in like AI as a tooling to automate better and to help better with that, and it's how we are using AI. For example, also at Giants One, like how can it help us do our job better? But the other side is making AI available to end users will also be based on Kubernetes. NVIDIA just announced their enterprise AI offering, and in that picture is a big Kubernetes block. Like it was just out like on the NVIDIA conference, and Jensen Huang talked about it. And you see this big Kubernetes block as the basis of their enterprise AI offering for end users. And this is interesting when you see like our niche community suddenly being at the forefront of the next generation, basically the hype that you're seeing. So that was super interesting to me, seeing that like on a big stage that is not KubeCon, seeing a big Kubernetes logo in a enterprise slide.
Well, Puja, thank you so much for taking the time to talk.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. We covered a lot of ground. So have a good show, and I look forward to talking soon.
You too.